This week's episode was brought to you by Jordan Elizabeth, Clayton Johansson, Vinny Liebert, and Sarah Puckey. Thank you, Jordan Elizabeth, Clayton Johansson, Vinny Liebert, and Sarah Puckey. It's with the generous support of listeners like yourself that we here at The Whole Rabbit continue to hold compulsory banquets for all the famous people in the land, getting them drunk, force them to make silly speeches that will immortalize, and make fun of for literally thousands of years. If you'd like to offer a silly speech or just hear the second half of the super duper secret half of this episode, then please navigate to www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your web browser can be used to digitally offer us a mere $5 in tribute that will instantly earn you monthly access to our entire library of extended episodes, stretching back into a time so full of memory holes the Swiss have filed a lawsuit. But not only that, I'll send you a 5x5 vinyl sticker of our big Bunny Baphomet cover art that is so sticky it will almost stick to anything. And if that were not enough, you'll receive access to our Discord server where we drink Kaikion and wax philosophic about the machinery of the universe. If you're enjoying The Whole Rabbit but are saving your $5 for a pressurized can of lactose-free whipping cream, then please consider doing us a solid and feverishly ranting in public or a friend about this show and see if they feel impelled to actually listen to an episode. If they don't, brainwash them. And when the police show up, make sure to tell them too. In this week's episode, we're joined once again by the mighty Julian the Philosopher to continue our discussion about the world's most important philosophers, the ideas they championed, and how we can use their wisdom to untangle the madness that has come to define our modern world. In this episode, we focus on the most important mind to ever grace Western civilization, Plato, with some emphasis placed on his dialogues in the Symposium and various arguments made in the Republic. In the extended side of the show, we begin to explore how Plato's teachings intersected with Nietzsche and Aleister Crowley, stopping to read some poetry from a number of the authors we discuss, and conclude with a view of the dark science fiction dystopia that stretches out before us on our next leg of the journey to seek the good life. Thank you, and enjoy the show. Why did prostitutes in 330 BCE dislike Plato?
Why?
Because his teachings were too thought-provoking. You don't get it?
No.
A thought is a whore.
Oh, I didn't know that.
She doesn't follow culture or the trends. She's too busy contemplating the good.
She's too busy solving all of the mysteries of the underworld.
Of my underpants.
6, 7?
Plato absent-mindedly bumped into someone while walking down the street. So he hands him this book and says, "Please accept my apology." Get it? No one? Oh my goodness.
I get it. I'm just eating.
Okay, that's not allowed.
She picked canned laughter.
Who is Socrates' worst student?
Who?
Mediocrates.
I like that one.
Well,
Wow.
first of all, it's pronounced Socrates. I mean, I've seen Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, so get your shit right, dude.
Is he even real?
Socrates?
Yeah.
Hell yeah. I've seen him in the movie.
Okay.
Like, Napoleon's in it, Genghis Khan. It's awesome.
All right, which one of his students was busiest?
Who?
The one that had a lot on his Play-Doh?
Eh.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I hate it when I get stuff on my Play-Doh.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Whole Rabbit, where we don't just argue amongst ourselves about the naked ontology belying the vacuous pit of popular culture orchestrated by the shadow puppeteers circumambulating the subterranean barbecue where the grill masters became a little too ornery with the liquid accelerant after shotgunning a container of liquid pretzels at Madame Blavatsky's torture dungeon. Nay, we occasionally open our banquet chambers to invite the best and wisest company in the kingdom to share in an evening of drink, conversation, and deep insight about the meaning of life itself. Because this week, we're joined by our guest Julian the Philosopher to discuss the bedrock of Western philosophy as expressed principally by Plato. I'm your host, Luke Madrid, also known as the Hack Rabbit. I'm joined this week by the Guardian of the Grove, Mari Sama.
Yeah, we're full, so it's a $5 cover charge.
That's right! You can go park over there. The Glitter Horse of the Golden Bow, Heka Astra.
Hello.
And the Hospitaller of the Holy Hallway, Tim, the Heartbreak Kid Hacker.
Have you even been to the realm of forms, bro.
That's the shape store, Tim.
Don't give it away.
Oh my god, you're so right.
This week, we're joined once again by the mighty mind of Julian the Philosopher, whose Medium articles and podcast interviews are taking the wise world by storm as he continues his crusade across cyberspace to preach the evangel of cyberpunk metaphysics, which at its spires reach into the domain of science fiction, yet are firmly rooted in the fertile bedrock of ancient philosophy. Welcome back to the show, Julian.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me again.
So it sounds like your latest article, or one of them that you've put out, reveals a musical harmony hidden within the writings of Plato.
Yes, so recent scholarship has been able to verify some very old claims about there being a hidden musical composition within Plato's works when you use AI to decipher each one of the books if you align them in mathematical categories.
Whoa! And so it's basically a structure behind his writings that once it's revealed show a hidden teaching, one that's not necessarily committed in language.
So if you study Plato's work, normally what you would find would be that there is actually a song that's openly talked about. It's called the music of the spheres, if we talked about last time, or the musica universalis, the music of the universe. And that was actually a Pythagorean theory. And it's talked about to a certain degree by a character who's in Plato's Republic, and his name is Timaeus. And you may recall that there is also a dialogue that bears his same name as well. And he recounts a version of creation within the story that basically tells a Pythagorean creation story where music and the composition of music is related to the structure and creation of the universe and the ordering of the universe. And so there's been a lot of scholarship and questions about whether Timaeus was a real person or not, because Plato portrays him as a character, as a wealthy Pythagorean philosopher, which is interesting because Plato himself is not in his own story. He doesn't appear at all, even though his brothers do. Adeimantus and Glaucon, both of them do actually appear, and Timaeus appears. So there's a lot of questions about, is Timaeus actually Plato? And he's like sharing his own ideas through this other philosopher who's in the story as well. And so some people think he is him just sharing another version of events, and instead of using Socrates, who he normally uses to puppet his views, Timaeus may also actually be Plato as well. So there's questions if he pops up in multiple points.
It's like Plato's alter ego, like Ziggy Stardust, but it's Timaeus.
It's his scientist alter ego, right?
Yeah.
Like,
It's his Pythagorean character that he's created, but he's using him just like Socrates to speak his ideas into existence. And Timaeus does talk about the music of the spheres. So there is kind of music already talked about. And also, don't forget, in the Symposium, it's a house party. They're having a house party, they're drinking, there's music, it is a party. Music has to be considered as like another layer underneath of the intellectual layer that we're used to dealing with.
so that's what I listened to via audiobook to prepare for this episode, because I was not familiar with the Symposium, and I'm sure glad I did, and not for the boy love, for the wisdom. And I gotta be honest with you, I'm gonna have an easier time talking about what is written and the core principles of Platonic philosophy than I am the unspoken esoteric aspect, as much as I want to present myself as the master wizard. And I think it would probably do best for ourselves and our audience to begin, before we ascend to those levels, to begin at the base principles and start with what forward-facing part of Plato makes him so important even today.
Okay, so I guess we have to begin at the beginning as usual with these kind of characters. So we have to speak about Plato as a human being as well in order to understand his place in history and the context, since context is king. We have to understand how he became the most significant character in Western civilization's ancient timeline. So the beginning of his life, he was born into an aristocratic family, and his early life was also shaped by the Peloponnesian War. The defining traumas in his life turns away from politics towards philosophy. So he traveled to the Mediterranean, he traveled to Egypt, he traveled to Italy and Sicily, searching and studying for Pythagorean math. So we have a connection here where you can see Egypt coming into play and you can see Pythagoras coming into play. So we have some other peripheral characters that are important to him. But what's most important that we have to focus on first is the man himself. He was actually, Plato, what it actually means is broad. So he was, it's not actually his real name. His real name is like Aristocles. Plato was like his nickname. It was like his username, like a screen name or something, like he was a live streamer. And Plato just means broad. So he was literally a workout Chad, and he would work out all day. And it was a very popular activity in Athens because the gymnasium was popular. You would see the Olympic athletes walking around everywhere. And the Olympic, it's interesting, this is the thing I brought up last time. The Olympic athletes themselves would work out all day basically, and they would be essentially, it's interesting, they're called Olympians because they look like gods, or essentially, right? Like walking on earth. And they would be given free food basically by Athens because they wanted these people to train and become great, essentially, right? It was all about the optimization of the individual about in the ancient world and in the Athenian perspective.
Well, I was reading book 6. I was surprised to learn that Socrates says that young people should focus on sports and refine their body and become in better shape because they can get burned out on philosophy if they start too early, and that it's better to start with those things and then move towards philosophy later. But it was of central importance taking care of the body.
I'm not going to go into it that deeply, but essentially they always depict Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle as these extremely old senior citizens. But in reality, the way that the Athenians saw Plato was as a weightlifter and a bodybuilder. So he would have been like a very strong person. It's complete opposite of what they tell you in school, right? So some of those AI Chad edits where they show him as like a bodybuilder just like lifting weights would be more accurate than those versions of him where they depict him as a very old person who's very incapable. So, and don't forget that Socrates also fought in the Peloponnesian War for Athens as a soldier. So both of these characters are people that have been, well, at least Socrates has been battle tested, and Plato is a very physically strong individual. So it makes a lot of sense that his philosophy would also, like the microcosm and the macrocosm, Plato believed that the man was a microcosm of the state and the city was a macrocosm of the individual. So you could measure the state by the individual. So he wanted, for example, in his utopia, the guardians of his utopia, notice that they're also men and women. They're not just men, that the guardians of his utopia would be given equal training, the men and the women, to be superior. And I think he got that from the Olympians, but he also got that from Sparta as well, because this kind of training regimen also seems very similar to the Spartan philosophy that I've been studying rigorously, because Greece is not just about Athens, despite what our history teachers would have us believe.
Yes, in the Symposium, it concludes the teachings of Diotima, who's a lady, and then throughout the dialogue, it directs you towards the idea that lovers would be the ideal partners on the battlefield, and from there, you're just a wink and a nod away from Sparta. You know what I mean?
Okay, so Diotima is an extremely important character that people overlook. She's one of the only female philosophers, I think the only one that's mentioned in Plato's Republic, I believe. Although there were some very prominent female philosophers in Athens and in Greece, the only one that he mentions within the context of Socrates is Diotima. So she's actually an experienced midwife and a nurse, and she is a teacher who teaches Socrates about life and about love. So when Socrates is speaking, you're not really sure if he's speaking from Plato's perspective or is he speaking from Socrates' perspective. And that's another whole debate. Who is speaking when he's speaking? Is it this person? Is it that person, right? And basically, Diotima is an interesting character because, like I said, Plato believed in like a version of equality, although that he believed in gender equality, but he didn't believe in individual equality. So he didn't believe that all people were equal, but he believed that men and women should be treated equal, because I believe that Plato believed in reincarnation, which is reiterated in the story. And he got that from Pythagoras, meaning that he believed that humans were switching bodies, but the soul remained the same. So the education of the soul was primary. The body education was also important, but the main education is of the soul, because the soul lasts longer than the body and goes to a different one.
In the Symposium, he sits through all these speeches and, they're praising Eros. They call him the oldest god, the youngest god, the best god. And when Socrates takes the stage, it sounds like almost everyone's left the party by then. But even still, he's hesitant to speak because based on what Diotima has taught him, he's about to contradict all of this praising that has come of Eros. And you can tell he almost is like pissing off the audience, being like, do you really think Eros is beautiful? You know, do you really think Eros is good? And it sounds like he just gets to the point where the audience is really getting tired of him. And then he's like, this is what Diotima taught me. And then he starts basically repeating what she told him. Because when he came to her, he's like, yeah, of course Eros is beautiful. And of course Eros is good. And she has to school him. It's of no small importance because, as Diotima reveals to him, Eros is not necessarily a god, but that doesn't make him unimportant. It makes him a medium through which all of magic and ritual occurs, which is a big reveal, especially from a woman philosopher, no doubt, one that he has placed above himself as a teacher in this regard. I found that to be positively striking and unexpected. And it's funny that that's the one text that they didn't show me in class.
So I have a lot to say on Diotima, that I think that she's got a bad rap, and I think that Western philosophy in general has gotten a bad rap because they believe for some reason that there were no women contributing to philosophy, which is like a huge mistake, because I think just like how there's all these philosophers that contributed today, you can kind of see that a lot of them have been marginalized for whatever reason. It's like if their views don't go with this particular view, then it's been cut from history, it's been removed, it's been changed. If anything, you can see Plato actually engaging in that himself because he's erased himself from his own dialogues.
Yeah.
So the self-erasure is something that we have to talk about, right? So like, why did he remove himself? Well, the reason is because he doesn't want to have himself saying these things because his mentor just got executed for impiety. And there was a lot of questions that I brought up as well about why Socrates was assassinated, basically. And there's a lot of questions are like, oh, well, he was executed because he was corrupting the youth, or he was executed because he didn't believe in the gods of the state. But I think there's a lot more complicated reasons for it as well. And I think Plato knew that if he openly talked about questioning the gods or repeating these words with his own voice, then he would get into trouble. So he used these other people kind of like a ventriloquist, essentially. And a lot of these women also in history, they would also be attacked as well and, you know, removed from history the same way that Plato was forced to remove himself. So it's kind of like a safety precaution, essentially. Like you can almost see that it's very different because the way that Plato writes, it's like everything's hidden, everything's esoteric. But when you look at Aristotle, he's very clear about everything. He's very open. And why is that? Because Plato lives at a time where Socrates was killed by his government, and Aristotle works for Alexander the Great. He moves to Macedonia, becomes a tutor hired by Philip of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, and then he teaches Alexander the Great. And so he's living in Macedonia. He's already left Athens, and he's not subject to the same kind of rules where talking about these political topics and these ideas and these people could get you removed. He was basically a lot more free to talk about what he wanted to, and that's why Aristotle has a very different writing style, and he's not subject to the same forces of political nature that Plato is. That's why we have to consider the context and who these people are. Although Plato's very strong, we can't underestimate him and say he's just a weightlifter. He's actually, even everything as simple as the invitation of Socrates to the Symposium party is actually a metaphor for democracy, because they come to Socrates and they say, oh, we don't see you here very often.
Yeah.
And then they kind of force him to go to the party against his will.
Yeah.
So it's like an example of democracy, because they're like outvoting him. They're like, well, there's more of us than there are of you, so I guess you have to come with us to the party because we say so. So it's kind of like Plato making a funny thing that people don't usually catch, and I didn't catch it the first 10 times I wrote it either. So,
well, there's something very humanizing about the Symposium, and if you were in college, it'd be very meta to read it because it's just a bunch of dudes hanging out, and it sounds like they're partying for a number of days. And the Symposium happens on the second day where, based on their conversation, they're fairly hungover. They feel most queer, and they're not ready to do what they call compulsive drinking, which suggests there are some days they set aside to get really hammered, and those were the days they sort of like communally decided. The word they use is compulsive. So they decide they're not going to force force anyone to drink. They're just going to drink as much as they feel like. What's humorous about this is they do come to this decision democratically. You know what I mean? Like, do we want to drink a little or a lot? What do we decide, people, you know? And so I see what you're saying here, where this living room has become a microcosm of the macrocosmic democracy.
So Phaedrus argues that love is the oldest and most powerful god, inspiring virtue and courage. And Pausanias distinguishes between common love, physical desire, and heavenly love, love of the soul and the intellect. Then Eryximachus, that's a hard one, say that one twice, a doctor who expands this idea to view love as a universal cosmic force of harmony and balance. And then Aristophanes offers a famous humorous myth that humans were once spherical beings who were split in half by Zeus, condemning us to spend our lives searching for our other half. And then Socrates shows up and presents the pinnacle speech recounting the teachings of a wise woman, the philosopher Diotima, and then he goes on to reject the idea that love is merely seeking the missing half, instead defining love as a ladder of love. He explains that love begins as an attraction to physical beauty, but ultimately transforms into a physical pursuit of eternal truth, wisdom, and the ultimate form of the good. So what we have to take into consideration here is who Aristophanes is. Now, Aristophanes from Greek history, he's a famous playwright. And I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, I don't want to Google this right now because I'm in a flow state, but Aristophanes, I'm pretty sure, wrote some insulting plays about Socrates. So this is like Plato getting his get back at Aristophanes, because there's weird things in this story where like you'd only know this if you literally knew like the beef between these people that they had with each other. Plato making Aristophanes say like get really drunk and say a bunch of stupid things that make him look stupid actually makes perfect sense because he doesn't like him, right? So it's like, yeah, there's a lot of like secret infighting that's going on here, right?
You could kind of feel that, but you're not really sure what. There's like some flirting going on and maybe some stuff's happened.
It just reminds me of like a ancient burn book.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we've immortalized this diss track, basically.
Well, that plays into what you're saying where like even if you disagree with someone or you maybe don't want to spend time with them, it's in the interest of what is good to invite everyone to the party and have a drink because that's the spirit of democracy.
And so we also have to remember that, okay, so Socrates delivers us philosophy by quoting a midwife philosopher. Now tell me that's not poetic at the end of the day. Plato's using Socrates, and this is a story from Socrates because obviously Plato is never, I don't think he meets Diotima. I think she's a much older character, like from Pythagoras' time. Basically, it's funny that she's a midwife, but she ends up delivering philosophy like it's a baby.
Yeah.
So it's like without her, you wouldn't have been able to deliver this baby, which is philosophy.
What is astounding to me is I didn't expect the text to conclude with Socrates, immortalized through Plato, so strongly aligning itself with Eros. Of course, in his own terms, as he's just explained through Diotima, but nonetheless, you get the impression that Eros, the god, is the key to so much. And this had passed me completely. As someone who's so into Thelema, I almost feel like if I wanted to explain Thelema to somebody who had no idea about it, I would just give them the Symposium, because that explains the things that I've learned in Thelema in a way that is already native to Western philosophy. I had just never read the Symposium yet.
I mean, they make a point to explain desire without lust for result, and that does have a lot to do with how Eros is explained.
So much of the difference between, well, it's like, well, everyone knows there's a common Eros and a heavenly Eros, just as there are two Aphrodites. And I found this to be extremely helpful. If you wanted to explain why Thelema isn't just butt sex and strippers, this dialogue would really help. You know what I mean? Because it's essentially the same thing. And explaining Eros as a medium rather than a god, I think, is a huge magical secret. And even leading up to Socrates speaking, you get the, from a magician standpoint, the early speakers are performing what appears to be magic. They're like invoking the deity, you say, oh, this deity's so great, it has these qualities, etc., etc. But then here Socrates comes and he's like, we're gonna go even harder and even deeper, and only then will we arrive at the true power of Eros, and it ends up being this key to everything. Like I've heard it said by La Maladuquette,
that a lot of early magicians, they fail because they do all the spells correctly, they do all the names correctly, they do the sigils and the time of day, but they're missing the romance. They're missing the love in their heart. And if you listen real close to that dialogue, you're not going to be able to make the magic work unless you have Eros, unless you are embodying Eros. And Diotima's presented in the text as like, dude, we had a plague in Athens and we needed this chick to come do sacrifices, and that was the only time we had a respite from the plague, is because she understands not just philosophy, but through her philosophy understands the principles of magic such that our priesthood would seek her out. You know what I mean?
Well, it's all too easy to hit the ceiling of your own perception. And I think that holds true for how Eros is described in the text, where you kind of cap yourself at your own understanding of it. So if you think of it as being more related to physical Eros as opposed to heavenly Eros, or you even misinterpret the link between the two, you kind of hit your own ceiling of understanding. And I think that's true also for modern day Thelema.
And then there's one final part after, actually, although it says that Socrates ends the symposium with the Diotima speech, actually there's one thing that happens after that you kind of alluded to. It's when Alcibiades comes in and he's all drunk and he starts hitting on Socrates. That's what you're talking about, right? Okay, so this is a really messed up part of the story, but it's very important. Once again, you have to understand who Alcibiades is for this to make sense. Otherwise, it just seems like a random drunk guy just shows up and starts hitting on Socrates. It would make no sense, right?
He's real good looking.
So remember, just
right? Like Alcibiades is good looking.
Yeah, that picture I sent you. He is the beautiful. He is like, this is the point, is that Socrates is depicted in the Republic as not physically attractive at this point because he's like 75 or something like that. Like he's already lived his life. He has a wife at the time and he has kids actually, even though he's 75, but he's not physically attractive. But he is the wisest, best person in Athens, right? Alcibiades is a rich man. He's famous. He's powerful. He's extremely good looking, but he's a very bad person, okay? But he loves Socrates, right? Because Socrates is everything that he isn't. So Alcibiades shows up drunk to the party, missed the whole important part of the party, shows up and then starts complaining to everyone that Socrates won't have a relationship with him for whatever reason, which is literally demonstrating the whole point that Socrates was trying to make and that Plato was trying to make, showing that no matter if you are beautiful, you're attractive, you're a celebrity, all these things, it doesn't matter, because what's really the only true wealth is the wealth of the soul, the wealth of the individual, the good life, right? The good life isn't the Alcibiades life, the being drunk and messing around, because in reality, what happens later is Alcibiades becomes a very unpopular character because I'm pretty sure he defects to the Spartans and betrays Athens and basically becomes a general on the other side. So people start distrusting Socrates because some of his students do messed up things like Alcibiades. So when you think about it in the long term, now it makes sense why Plato would choose this particular person to make this particular point. Just like Aristophanes. Aristophanes' story makes absolutely no sense. He's talking about like how Zeus made people, cut people into half, and half is a man and half is a woman, and that's why we search for our other half. Yeah. It's obviously a made up story to make him look stupid, but you wouldn't know that unless you understood like the full context of the character and why Plato wants these particular people to look ridiculous.
I don't know why I've heard that story so many times, but never in its proper context of like the Symposium. Like the humans are born with 2 heads and 4 arms. It's the most ridiculous idea, and I'm happy that I'm getting the point that it's supposed to be ridiculous.
Is this like where we get twin flame crap?
That's essentially what
dude,
he argues.
So cringe.
It is so cringe.
Well, it's funny because that's how they're presenting it, you know, back in BCE, is that it was cringe back then.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't like a good idea back then either.
Yeah, but people think it's like the truth now, which is so funny.
I have had like a couple like female I don't want to say stalkers, but like girls who have fallen in love with me over the internet and been like, oh, we're twin flames. It's like, okay, this is like my like 6th twin flame now.
Or even like the concept of a soulmate. I wonder if it comes from that specifically.
So interestingly about the soulmate thing, so I think if we take the soulmate and we add incarnation to it from a Pythagorean perspective, what if the soulmate isn't as if you're born and there's one person who's your person? Imagine the soulmate is like the same person that your soul has fallen in love with throughout multiple lives, throughout history. Yeah. Pythagoras didn't die. He's still with us. He's another person. Diotima, Socrates, Plato, if they're right, then none of these people's souls actually died. They're still here. They're just reincarnated as another person.
I always viewed it as like, it's not how people think romantically about a soulmate, but that if you do encounter someone like that, it's like your extended soul family that you often incarnate with. So it's like, hey, homeboy, like I knew you in another life. So you have that connection. But it doesn't mean that you're fated to like have a Romeo and Juliet experience with them and like die together or like whatever.
I mean, don't we get sick of people once in a while?
Yeah, for sure. But it's like, if you
I'm
can
tired of
recognize,
twin flaming with you, bro. No more.
but I feel like we can recognize each other from paths because of that. But it's not necessarily like eros or romance. It's not about that. It's something else.
Well, there's different kinds of love. There's filiae, storge, and I forget the other one. There's like 3 different kinds. It's family love, and I forget what the Latin terms are, but it's like I learned about this. I took a course called the Philosophy of Love. They literally had that at university. It was like family love, friend love, and romantic love. So there's 3 different delineations of love.
Where's the
and
butt
all of
sex
them are
love?
Ooh,
I
that's
guess
a good
that would be
kind.
the romantic one.
They talk about that
Oh,
in the
yeah.
Symposium. They talk about that. They say, like, look, if you want the butt sex from a boy that's not mature enough to, like, have his own thoughts,
Ew,
that's a
that's
little
yuck,
icky
yuck.
and gross. Yeah, that's icky and yuck, and it's to be looked down upon. But if you are attracted to a young man who shows signs that he will be moral and have a good memory and speak real good, then it's noble for you to, like, show up on his doorstep in the middle of the night and beg for his little itsy bitsy feet to be wiped on your face or whatever they did back then. I don't know. But not the other way around, you know? And
They combed each other's hair.
and see, that's the thing is like the love that could produce a child, that's like earthly. And that is related to Eros because it's us loving the goodness that's related to immortality.
Bro,
But
have you
the
ever heard
love
of the
that you
sacred
could
band?
get between a man and a boy is the purest love.
Words can't express what you mean to me.
Oh my God, that's so cringe.
That's, I mean,
But have you?
That's what they,
talking about-
I mean,
Julian, do you know what the sacred band is?
That
Okay, so it's the most elite fighting force in all of Greece. And what they basically did was they had 2 butt buddies get together and they paired them all in an entire like army, like a unit, like a
they
elite
talk
unit.
about that.
And yeah, and they were like unstoppable.
That's what he said.
They were called the sacred band.
They were like, look, okay, you know how when you do a bad, you could embarrass yourself with your kid or your parents, and that's like one thing. But if you embarrass yourself in front of like your lover or your crush, that's the worst. So they're like, what we should do is make sure everyone in the military is lovers because then they would always be heroic. They would always be self-sacrificing. They didn't say it, but I was like, that's the fucking Spartans, bro. And then I saw
No, they could go toe to toe with Spartans, the sacred band. They were
Wait,
probably
wait.
the only
No,
other
wait.
force
I just
that
did
could
a
go toe to toe
I
with
just did a
them.
search on them. There was only 300 of them, which is interesting.
Yeah, I said they were an elite unit.
150 male couples, 300 men in total, organized by age. They were a Theban army in the 4th century BC, 400 years before Jesus, and they were eventually defeated and destroyed by Philip of Macedon and younger Alexander the Great. So interesting that Alexander the Great and Philip of Macedon come through and obliterate them later because they took over all of Greece. So it would make sense for that to take place, right?
Hey man, you got to go out somehow. Might as well go out gloriously with your butt buddy.
hey, I had a quick question before we move on from the love stuff. They have all the different loves you were just listing. What's agape? Because that's used a lot in like religious context, but it's unconditional love, like godly or divine love. So I didn't know if is that part of Plato's stuff or is that something separate that was like coined later?
It's an ancient Greek word that refers to the most selfless form of love, characterized by unconditional sacrificial action that seeks the best for others, irrespective of circumstances. And it's like also Christian theology frequently describes God's perfect love for humanity and the reciprocal love believers are called to show. So it's some kind of like self-sacrificing love. I guess it's like a love that like almost it transcends like the individual kind of. It's almost like you lose yourself in the concept of it. It's almost like what I've talked about before about how you can be possessed by the zeitgeist or the spirit of the time. It's almost like you're possessed by the spirit of Eros and you just end up like, you know, doing stuff like Van Gogh or something, like sending your ear to a girl or something like that. Like it's almost like being possessed by the spirit of love itself.
or like, you know, if the Persians are bearing down on your little precious boyfriend and his speared shield, you'll jump in and save him if it means giving up your life, which is considered noble and good.
It also applies It also applies to strangers, though. Like, it's implied that you would sacrifice for your name, not just your family or lover.
Right, so hear me out here. The numerical value of agape is 93, which is also thelema. And so in the system of thelema, that is what it is meant to represent. And it
Love under cringe. Cringe is the law.
well, this is what it's discussing in the Symposium. That's what it means. Love is the law, love under will is that it that's why Eros is described as a medium, because underlying all of your actions should be love or Eros. And so the Symposium takes all of that weird abstraction that you find in thelema and it just says it in plain English or Latin or whatever it was, you know.
Greek, yeah. So I was gonna say, if anyone is interested in like being a really big nerd and being into the Plato stuff and getting super into like the context, like I was getting into trying to understand who the people are that are talking in the dialogue, because it matters who these people are. There's another character called Xenophon, and Xenophon is another student of Socrates, and he also defects to the Spartans as well. So I don't know if you're seeing a little bit of a pattern here. It's almost like students from Socrates get really interested in Sparta, and almost all of them end up like getting interested in it, including Plato himself, right? Xenophon basically was an ancient Athenian soldier, a historian, and a philosopher. He was a younger contemporary student of Socrates, and he wrote his own symposium as well, recounting the same party, but with slightly different settings. It's called Xenophon's Symposium, yes. And it recounts the same party, but one of the things that he chooses to add to it is that there's a point where dancing girls come in, and they're like playing music, and his version of the party is like way more crazy, like there's way more partying going on, everyone's being wild and stuff. So it's different than Plato's Symposium, because Plato makes it more like an academic lecture, whereas Xenophon's one, it's like, and then there's dancing girls, and then there's partying, and people are more drunk. So because he's like I guess he's a younger man, and he's more interested in other elements of it than Plato is interested in. So it's interesting how you can see the same event described by two different people. And once again, if you're interested in context and understanding the characters, it's important to see that the defection of Xenophon and Alcibiades basically made Socrates look like he was teaching people to distrust the city of Athens, because it's like, why are all your best students leaving? Not only leaving, but joining the literal our worst enemy, because they really they don't really depict it properly, but they really didn't like each other.
Like Luke Skywalker
You gotta explain yourself a little bit.
and his Jedi Academy, all the ones that turned to the dark side.
Yeah.
That's what it
Oh,
reminds
you
me
mean
of.
Kylo Ren kind of? Oh, I get what you're saying. Like he's
I mean-
like
the fan
Xenophon's
fiction.
like Kylo Ren or something.
Well, even in the expanded universe, this happens.
That's true. Expanded universe is superior. You're right.
Yeah, you fucking reactionary.
There's some really
She's right,
profound
though,
stuff
she's
that I
right.
wanted to add, though, if you have a chance. There's some really important stuff that needs to be said about this book, just to give people some understanding of why some people consider this book to be one of the most important books ever written in human history. And I think that we should do it justice to understand why that is the case. Like, there's only a couple other books in human history that have ever had as much significance. I would say the Bible, maybe Atlas Shrugged, a couple other books that have been able to have this level of impact on humanity.
Lord of the Rings is another.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, but then you could say that all of the books after him were like so deeply influenced by him, including our political systems, our philosophical system, the entire West, as North Whitehead says, all Western philosophy is merely footnotes to Plato. All of it.
True.
The good
It's
news,
not an exaggeration.
when you read Plato, it's really easy to relate to. You know what I mean? Like, that's why we should keep it around, because it helps us understand ourselves. It's not hard to imagine. It's like, oh, I'm on my way to a party, and then my friend came and like tugged on my cloak and was like, hey man, what are you doing? It's like, it's stuff that you can imagine. It's stuff that you've maybe been through yourself.
Hey
Keep it
man,
around.
come join the sacred band with me.
Oh, I was gonna say, so we have to take into consideration the Odyssey, which is being talked about right now in huge fashion, and there's a reason for that. Because before philosophy, Greek heroes were, through the Odyssey and the Iliad, that was Greek civilization. When I tell everybody, read the classics, read the Odyssey and the Iliad, don't watch the movie, because they used to believe in the Greek society before the philosophers that all you needed was these poets in order to teach you about life. So it was like all of Greek civilization was wrapped up into these stories. And so the Greek heroes, like before the Greeks settled down and became agrarian and moved towards more civilization, they were more nomadic pirates and raiding fighting parties, and it makes sense why their heroes also exemplified those same characteristics. So you think about Ajax, Achilles, or Odysseus. These were not necessarily morally good characters, although they were very strong characters. They're the heroes from renown that they talk about in the Bible, basically. And some of them, like Achilles, were literally half god and or immortal or something like that. But essentially, like Achilles was not a good person, and we all know that, right? Like when he hated someone, he would destroy them. If he wanted to have sex, he would have sex. There was nothing he couldn't do if he didn't want to do it, basically, because nobody could stop him. And this is basically the example that they were giving to people before philosophy existed of how to live a good life. It was like to be a warlike hero, and the gods in the city all exemplified each other, like the macrocosm and the microcosm. What Plato did was he used Socrates to replace Achilles. So think of the displacement or the demotion of the Greek heroes from their position of prominence in society and demoting them to a lower position in society, because the Greek heroes are the heroes of the body, where Socrates is the hero of the mind.
Yeah,
so you
much
see,
more close
and
to
I
now.
always talk about this. Yeah, we move from the mythos to the logos, right? The mythos meaning the mythological, the logos meaning like the divine mind or whatever. So essentially, Greek heroes, although they represented a strong, powerful civilization, there were certain immoral characteristics that they had that prevented them. They were like soap opera characters, basically. And the idea that you should be teaching everybody from like a Greek soap opera, basically, is like not the best, because they're very dramatic characters. They're violent. They're not rational. They're not morally good people. So to teach an entire civilization to emulate Achilles and Ajax and Odysseus would turn out very badly in the long run, right?
That sort of sounds like
trying to
these days.
that sounds like I was gonna say that. It sounds like that's how it is today, isn't it? That feels like that's how it is today, dude.
Worstest,
Notice how they're
Everest.
using the Odyssey right now.
Role models.
Notice how the Odyssey has become very important to people right now. What does that tell you? That tells you we're living in the days of the very immorality that Plato was trying to dispense with. He was trying to move from that time period where the strong do what they want and the weak do what they must. That was the opposite, because if you remember in the Republic, he talks about that, how the might is right perspective is wrong. And that's what those people represented, right? So Plato was trying to move it. Literally, you can also see human civilization being dragged forward out of the clutches of the Greek heroes into the realm of the logos.
Hell yeah. And Jesus was like the candle on top of that.
I think you
very
could
much so
argue that Jesus was the candle on top of that. I think you could, because
Hell yeah. Because look at it this way. Before Jesus, it was about might is right, like what Julian is saying. Whereas after Jesus, the entire like paradigm shifted to not who's the strongest, might is right. It shifted to how to play the game is what matters.
it almost sounds more heated than anything I read in the Apology or the one where he has to actually drink the poison. The opening of the Republic, it almost sounds like they come to blows, and they don't, because it's a party and they respect Socrates. But what's the name of the person he's speaking to in that? I don't know my Greek names that well. Book one.
What?
They're celebrating Bendis. Let me look it up. I got it here.
Okay, while we are in that little pause, did you know that there's a lot of evidence that during the Bronze Age collapse, that the Philistines were actually Greeks, the Philistines from the Bible, like the sea people.
Oh, because they're on boats?
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. Like I said, before the Greeks settled down in the Bronze Age, they were raiders and they were moving around doing a lot of damage in the area. So it would make sense that there would be these like roving bands of like Greek mercenaries and fighters and pirates, and that maybe they like formed some kind of group, because it is strange that they went around, they defeated the Egyptians, and then they disappeared. Like
They're
they
the
didn't
sea
stay
peoples.
around to like form a new government or anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like from the Bronze Age collapse era where we were defeated by the sea peoples, and that's them. I believe it's the Greeks at least.
That's a good argument.
It's book one of the Republic. They're all at an event together. Socrates is talking, and then Thrasymachus, I think I'm saying it right. Thrasymachus comes in, he's like, Socrates, you are entirely full of shit. At one point, he accuses his nurse of not wiping his own nose or something. Thrasymachus basically sees Socrates' argument as drivel, and it's the opinion of somebody who hasn't fought in a war. But he's saying that the good life is the immoral life, and that justice is there for the weak to serve the strong, and that it is might that makes right, and that it is moral people who cannot be depended upon to be strong or take the lead or to use immorality enough to advance themselves. And so the good life is the immoral life. That's what he says. That's what Thrasymachus is saying. He is basically representing the philosophy of what we're talking about. You know, these Greek pirates, you know, might makes right. And he's saying, like, the leaders should look at the people as if they are sheep to be shorn, and that a leader is constantly looking after their own good at the expense of the people that they lead. And Socrates is like, you've got it all wrong, and not only do you have it all wrong, you have it dangerously wrong. So without us coming to blows, let us discuss using your own arguments why you are wrong. And the whole time Thrasymachus is like, you are annoying. I don't like how you're arguing. You've backed me into a corner. Like, yeah, go ahead and just tell me your argument. You're gonna tell me anyway. And it almost sounds like a neurotypical person arguing with an autistic person. It makes me wonder if Socrates was autistic, and that's why he was impervious to certain forms of charisma or certain arguments that appealed to emotion. And if not, he certainly fits the neurodivergent archetype to some extent, if only because of how closely he sticks to what he's saying and doesn't like get off course. He just sticks to exactly what he's saying. And he can get Thrasymachus to agree in his own terms that the tyrant and the criminal live a miserable life. And that if criminals and tyrants didn't have some form of goodness or selflessness, they couldn't even work amongst each other. You know what I mean? And so he basically philosophically puts an end to might makes right in the beginning of the Republic. And I can only assume it begins that way because that's important for having a republic. In the first place, you have to assert that justice is there to protect the people. It's not to serve the individual. And that is what society, or the society we should want, a good society, is founded upon. Justice, goodness, the law, you know, all that stuff. And then I could see why Jesus could become a symbol of that. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, so we have to understand who Thrasymachus is. Once again, you have to remember who the character is.
He sounds like a badass.
Sophist.
Oh, he's a sophist.
He's
okay.
a sophist.
He just says whatever to get what he wants.
So he's saying whatever he needs to say to get paid. Thrasymachus is basically a tutor who rich people pay to teach them how to talk and use rhetoric to get what they want out of other people. So he teaches verbal manipulation and like debate bro tactics. So think of Thrasymachus as a debate bro. So when Thrasymachus says, I don't like the way you're debating, it's because Thrasymachus is looking for the win condition and Socrates is looking for the truth.
Yes.
Which is two different things. So, and also you have to remember that Socrates, the Socratic method that Socrates developed is involving him asking questions, constantly asking questions of the other person and not sharing his own perspective. That's why they're always pushing him like, tell us what you think. Tell us what you think. And he's like, no, I don't want to tell you what I think. I'm just going to keep finding out what you think by asking you questions based on what you say. So it's almost like Socrates is like the best CIA interrogator you've ever met in your entire life, because he can just like pull information out of people and he doesn't give them anything. And it's such an annoying conversation for people, because imagine somebody where every time you ask them a question, they ask you a question in return and they don't give you the answer you're looking for. So that's probably the reason why Thrasymachus is like pissed off with him, because it's like they're looking for different win conditions, basically.
I don't know, man. Sometimes I watch Canadian politics.
Bro, when I have a conversation with my wife, she seems like Socrates and I seem like Thrasymachus. Like, I'm telling you, I think Socrates was a little on the spectrum. And it's this thing where like Thrasymachus is relying on like social cues and riz and like momentum, and like he uses ad hominem, you know what I mean, in his argument. And Socrates is like, we'll just like, I'm not doing any of that. I'm simply sticking to your arguments and your reasoning, and I'm going to prove you are wrong using your own words. And, you know, I skip past 5 books. I get to book 6, and he's having a conversation with someone else, and they're going over like, you know that everyone finds you irritating, right? You know what I mean? Like, people don't like talking to you, Socrates, because you make them talk by answering a bunch of your questions, and then you make them answer so many questions that by the end of it, they've negated what they started with, and people feel that this is manipulation in some way, even though they don't know how to articulate it. It seemed like I was reading something from like 500 BC that could have happened like, 5 minutes ago.
That's what makes him a great teacher, though, because he doesn't just tell you what the truth is. He shows you, and you discover the truth on your own through your own logic and perception. That's what makes him a great teacher.
Yep.
I was going to say, let's not forget that there's this interplay between philosophers as well that we have to take into consideration. So I remember we had a conversation before where you said, what does Nietzsche think of this situation? And how does that relate us to the modern day? How does that create a bridge between the past and the future? How we can make this stuff relevant to people today? And I think the way we can make it relevant to people, because, why would they care about a house party 2,500 years ago or something, right? Which essentially that's what it is. So we're all like obsessing about Western civilization is based on a house party.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're all about.
It's relatable.
You know?
It's relatable.
Yeah, and don't forget, it's also music as well. So think about it. So Plato is basically like a modern day like podcaster who's like hiding Easter eggs in his like in the Republic, and he's working out, and like it's like all these things that you could honestly see a modern person doing. It's like he's doing all these things that we're engaged in. I think he would totally like maybe we'd have to explain some of the dynamics to him, but he would be like, oh yeah, I totally get all this stuff. Especially don't forget Plato's cave. The cave of the allegory is one of the most powerful metaphors for, a controlled society and the raising up, coming out of the darkness and into enlightenment out of the cave of illusions. But the important part about the bridge is that Nietzsche hated Plato and Socrates the way Plato hated Homer. So Plato hated Homer because Plato was so mad at Homer because Homer is so good. He's so amazing. He's a natural talent. He's like a genius basically. But Homer has devoted his artistic abilities to writing characters that are immoral basically. All the heroes he writes are immoral according to Plato. They're objectively immoral, even by today's standards, but even 2,000 years ago, they still thought these people were immoral. So it's not like there's like a very big shift. It's like people knew what they were, right? And basically, the reason that Plato hated them is because they were so central to everything. And he said, I'm going to replace them. I'm going to replace Homer with Plato. And
I would say Odysseus is probably the least. Go on, sorry though.
Odysseus is like the most craftiest one of the three, and he's also the smartest, but he also does a bunch of weird stuff. Like, he'll lie to people, or he'll steal, or he'll deceive people. So he's not like a terrible person like Achilles or Ajax is, but Odysseus is like Loki. He's like the trickster god, basically.
I said the least. And least worst is this.
So Nietzsche basically did the same thing to Plato and Socrates that Plato did to Homer. He tried to displace them because Nietzsche knows, like I do, that Plato is the most significant philosopher in Western civilization. If you don't know Plato, you don't know philosophy. So Nietzsche says, I'm going to replace Plato with myself. I'm the new guy, right? He's doing the exact same thing to them that they did to Homer. Yeah, he's the new guy in town, basically. And Nietzsche said, I'm the new guy. And Nietzsche even went further than that. He said, not only am I going to replace Plato, but I'm going to replace Jesus himself, and I'm going to become the new guy, and I am the guy that comes to end everything. So it's interesting how these people all relate to each other because they're like having a conversation with each other. Like Nietzsche's talking directly to Plato's ghost, and Plato's talking to Homer's ghost.
Damn, dude, drop the mic. Dunk.
Will you stay with us for one more hour so we can discuss how that is important and why and how it's affecting our society today and what we're going to do about it?
All right.
Well then, if you'd like to hear that part of the conversation, then you're going to have to visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit and pay us at least $5, where that monthly donation will give you instant access to the second half of this episode, our entire backlog going back 7 years of extended episodes, and instant access to our Discord server where you can induce the people that you're hearing right now on this show into a philosophical conversation because we cannot resist. Until then, everybody, thank you, eat carrots, and shoot lasers.
Pew, pew, pew.
Oh, Julian,
Pew, pew,
tell
pew.
us where we can find you.
Right. So I'm on Medium, Julian Soloninka, and that's where you're going to find all my writings. And on Facebook and YouTube, same. It'd be Julian the Philosopher or Julian Soloninka.
And what was that other podcast you just did your cyberpunk collab with?
That's actually on my YouTube channel. That was just me alone, just having a dialogue with a really great author.
Check out all that stuff. And if you want more of this conversation, we'll see you on Patreon. Thank you, everybody. Eat carrots and shoot lasers.
Pew, pew, pew.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Whole Rabbit. You have now inserted yourself into the secret meeting of the tape, where you are now to join us in the round table of bunnies.
Sub Rosa.
Sub
You
Rosa.
paid the entrance fee.
We are joined once again by Julian the Philosopher to discuss how Platonic philosophy has evolved or perhaps devolved, run into a crash course with Nietzsche, and left us squarely in the present.
present.
So we mentioned off air we wanted to pick up around the death of Plato.
So basically, in a general sense, Plato, near the end of his life, had a very interesting talk that he did. And he did a talk called a public talk. This is after the death of Socrates, and this is after he spent 12 years traveling through Sicily and Italy, eyeing up old Pythagorean texts and studying with them as well before he makes it back. And basically, everyone was expecting him to give Socratic type of talk on the good, what a good life is, on virtue ethics, on the things that they had come to know him for. Instead, he gave them a really long, complicated lecture about math and about the monad and about sacred geometry, which basically threw everybody at the conference as they didn't understand what he was talking about, because at the time, mathematics was still considered like kind of an esoteric study, and it wasn't seen the way we look at it today. It was almost like a quasi-mystical process that people understood in a sense in the practical applications, but in the sense of like developing things like calculus or irrational numbers or other things, it was still far outside of their understanding. But Plato did always have this stipulation where he said, in order to study at his academy, you had to learn geometry. And he got that from Pythagoras. So this kind of dovetails into one of our prior talks about Pythagoras and how he was a very important figure that lived before Plato. And what my belief is that after Socrates died, it was so traumatic for Plato that he basically left Athens and went on a search to find someone who was of equal or superior intelligence and virtue. And the only person he came across seems to be Pythagoras, that Plato was so inspired by. So if you think of him, the classic example would be the Socrates as his teacher and mentor, but his shadow would definitely be of Pythagorean nature.
Interesting.
So this kind of sets the later part of his life in a different light, because the first part of his life was growing up in an aristocratic family in Athens. The middle part of his life was influenced by his mentor and teacher Socrates, and then his death. And after that, it seems like Pythagoras became the greatest influence in Plato's life based on this wildly misunderstood talk that he did near the end of his life. And it was clear that the people that were following him were not prepared and not really interested in math. They were only interested in the social aspects, the practical aspects, let's say the applications of philosophy, not the theoretical. So it kind of fell on deaf ears, unfortunately. But for those who are initiated, we should be hearing a lot more than what he was saying. We have to be reading between the lines because silence speaks volumes.
Well, this is something I'm sympathetic to, because during the symposium, when he was talking about Aphrodite, and Eros being devoted to Aphrodite, it's almost easier to understand through the lens of like the Kabbalistic tree of life. Like if you were to put Aphrodite or Venus on Netsock, for instance, she doesn't just represent carnality and sex. There's an aspect to Netsock where she's an intellectual lover and partner as well. So Netsock is expected to be good at conversation, knowledgeable, but at its even deeper level, it represents how the goodness that shines beyond the world is reflected in the world in numinousness. And this is something that is brought up in the Republic, where they're like, well, we could see how there is something that is good, but we only see it in the world as the numinous. And it takes philosophy to see that underlying unity of goodness behind everything. And that the good is much like how the sun is to sight, where you don't apprehend the good directly, but you could see what the good is shining upon. And by observing what the good is shining upon, do we gain knowledge and wisdom. And so it sounded to me like his teachings, presuming that the Republic was near the end of his life, had some of that, I guess what we would call Neoplatonic today, where it's like there's this otherworldly transcendent unity that is responsible for the numinousness. And in the Symposium, you're supposed to elevate your love and appreciation of everything in the world up higher and higher and higher, so that you're not just appreciating the numinous, you're appreciating the principle behind it, the goodness behind it.
Yeah, it says here that he was was 53 years old when he wrote The Republic. So that would have been later on in his life because I think he died in his 80s.
Man, living to be 80 in the ancient
pretty
world.
old.
Jeez.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
getting
Yeah,
pretty old
goated.
for that time period. You have to remember he was a bodybuilder and he was very into health, and these kind of people probably would have done better than the average citizen. And don't forget, he was also an aristocrat.
Mental health has a huge like longevity factor.
Although his idea was basically like the cultivation of wisdom as the main thing, they didn't forget the body either. Like they had a very rigorous Spartan workout calisthenics routine that like mirrored like an Olympian's workout routine. And then it also, if you remember one of our other talks that we had at the beginning, I ended it off with that joke about Socrates when they asked him what his punishment should be. And he said, I should be given free food for life like an Olympian because I'm so great and like I've done much good for the city. Now it kind of starts to make a lot more sense. You're like, oh my God, their philosophers are comparing themselves to the Olympians, but they're like the Olympians of the mind, right? Because Socrates is like an old man at the time, but all these younger people and all these athletes were like looking up to him. Alcibiades is like, please pay attention to me. He's like, you notice me, senpai. And he's like, no, not interested. Like your lack of wisdom disturbs me. I find your lack of wisdom disturbing, right? Like the Darth Vader quote. So it basically,
Yeah, he's like, you're cringe. Get away from me.
Find your lack of sauce.
yeah, like I think that Alcibiades was kind of cringe essentially, and and he ended up betraying the city and doing it and going off on his own and doing this stuff, and it kind of brought disrepute.
What about Diogenes, the greatest of all Greek philosophers?
Yeah, Diogenes the dog. Diogenes was one of the only people capable of defeating Plato in an argument, and one of the most legendary times that he defeated him was when Plato described man as a featherless biped, and in response to this, Diogenes brought a plucked chicken into the academy and gave it to them and said, here is Plato's man, and he just leaves. And everyone is like, what the
That's
heck just happened, right? Like this crazy guy just comes in and like throws a chicken at them just to like prove that man is not a featherless biped, because like obviously there's also this other story, I think I might have told it before, but it was about like they're in the courtyard and Diogenes is peeling potatoes and Plato's like partying with all the rich people, which now makes a lot of sense. And he's like, you don't have to peel potatoes if you're just nicer to the rich people. If you would just suck up to Pericles a little bit, maybe you wouldn't be in the courtyard peeling potatoes. And Diogenes looks up from his potatoes and says, well, if you weren't so nice to Pericles and you didn't suck up to them so much, when you peeled more potatoes, you wouldn't have to do all that sucking up to rich people. But Diogenes had such a disregard for rich people. He literally said that because everything is so beautiful in a rich person's house, the only place to spit is their face. So
Wow. This guy is like awesome.
He's like
and one time
way
this guy
more
was
base than
calling him
Socrates.
names. He called him a dog in the street, so he whipped out his dick and peed on him.
he's like the court jester of philosophers.
Yeah, he's the best one.
Yeah, I wrote an article about this actually. I called it The Philosopher's Shadow and the Jester's Privilege. There's this classic image of Diogenes and he's holding a lantern. If you've ever seen this image of him, he's often depicted with a lantern and a dog by his side, okay? And you'll know that that's him next time you see it.
That's an archetype.
It's a recognizable meme because, a good character, you should be able to recognize them just by their outline.
Yeah.
So you would know by the dog by his side and the lantern. The reason he has the lantern is because someone asked him one time during the day, why Diogenes, why are you walking around with a lantern, a lit lantern during the day? It makes no sense. And he's looking around Athens and he says, I'm looking for an honest man, but I'm not able to find one. And it's like, it's just funny how like it's almost like prop comedy. Like, why is Diogenes running around with a plucked chicken and like a lit lantern during the day? I don't know. It's almost like all the things that he does, they're almost like a comedy routine to a certain degree.
He's the inspiration for the hermit card from the tarot.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. And don't forget, he's like the poorest man in Athens, but he's like smarter than all of the people who are like on the top. So it kind of makes sense why Socrates and Diogenes would have seen each other as like contemporaries. You could see Diogenes would actually be more so a cynic or more so a stoic, and especially in his dress, because you would always know a stoic philosopher, unlike Plato. Like Plato's a rich guy wearing really nice clothes and he's a bodybuilder, right? But stoics would be like, they'd have a cloak, they'd have a stick, and that's how you would know what they were. And they would have their cloak would literally roll up so that you could sleep on it. So they would live outside all the time. So you kind of see Diogenes as like semi-stoic, but then he would probably have made fun of the stoics and says, oh, you're still too civilized. I'm way more uncivilized.
I have a new favorite. Diogenes would totally be the chaos magician out of the bunch. It's like bringing the golden apple to the party and shit.
It's funny because the hermit in the tarot is classically depicted, of course, the lantern, a dog, and then the big cloak. And it's sort of understood that he's separate from society because he's above it in some way. So how do we think Pythagoras influenced Platonic thought and his teachings? Did it fundamentally change them, or did it just give him a more confusing way of explaining the same thing?
Okay, so remember Pythagoras, how he came to his belief system was he traveled to Egypt and he studied there, and then he got kidnapped when the Persians attacked and he got taken to Babylon and he learned in Babylon as well. Pythagoras got 3 different initiations. So that's where he got his logic from. Plato also went on a similar trip as well. He went to Sicily, he went to Italy, and he went to Egypt. So he didn't go to Babylon, but he did the other ones. But if you think about it, Pythagoras didn't really want to go to Babylon either. It was kind of against his will. He was kind of brought there as a prisoner of war, basically. But essentially, Plato basically, he was initiated, you could argue, because the Pythagoreans were still around after Pythagoras died for many more years, all the way through. So, like, he picked up a lot of these things because, like I said, after his mentor was gone, he was looking for someone else to mentor him. And he came across the Pythagoreans, and it made sense that, like, he adopted some of their belief systems. So Socrates basically was also killed because he didn't believe in the gods of the city. And I think that this is because Plato and Socrates were questioning Homer and the Odyssey and the Iliad and saying these are not legitimate ways to teach young people to be good human beings. This is not a legitimate way to treat society. Like, he loved them. He thought they were great people. Like, he thought Homer was amazing. He was a genius, but he was upset that he thought that the morality of the Greek heroes was lacking, and therefore it was teaching Athens to be like a bad society. And he was right, because Athens eventually does get defeated by the Spartans and then by Rome. So he's completely right about the weakening of society. Eventually, if you teach everyone that justice is the advantage of the strong, you're going to get destroyed by someone who's stronger.
From what little I know about that war, like if you listen to Professor Zhang talk about it today, he explains that that was a perfect example of how an empire will lean into its hubris and then be promptly destroyed. You know, they thought they could beat the Spartans. They did like the secondary campaign and it just rolled them up entirely.
Athens was a sea power and Sparta was a land power. So they were like a fundamental mismatch, right? Because Athens was like trading and like raiding other people around the sea area, and the Spartans were just focusing on Messina and on Sparta themselves and like creating their own little city-states and kind of a utopian society that they were creating. It was like an experiment that the Spartans were conducting in their own system. So it was like 2 different competing utopia experiments. And one was democratic, and the Spartans were a mixed democracy. So they had 2 kings and they had multiple ephors who were like elected officials. So it was like a combination where they had 2 kings plus elected officials. So you kind of see it's almost like a proto-Roman structure, because it's like a Caesar and a lesser Caesar, or like 2 equal co-Caesars or whatever. And then you had like the Senate, right? Whereas Athens was like, you know, mostly direct democracy because there was a different system. So it was like 2 competing systems that ended up clashing with each other due to these differences of opinion on how to rule the utopia.
Now, if I remember correctly from college, I believe to be on the Spartan Senate, you had to have like a whole lot of years on the battlefield, and that was how you ascended to those positions. It's like Starship Troopers.
Have you ever heard of the myth of the metals? The myth of the metals is from Plato's Republic, and he talks about basically in his perfect society, he has these 3 different levels, right? The bronze-souled individuals, the silver-souled individuals, and the gold-souled individuals, okay? The gold-souled individuals are the philosopher kings, the silver-souled individuals are the guardians, and the bronze individuals are like the regular citizens, okay? Only the regular citizens are allowed to own property. The silver and gold souled individuals are supposed to be operating for the sake of virtue and honor and renown. They're not supposed to be operating like owning property and stuff. Like Plato believed in like a reverse communism. Instead of the government taking everything from the people, the government would basically own nothing, and the people would be given the majority of their resources back, right? The surplus resources would be given back to the workers rather than being piled up by a central authority. So it was like, if you want to be part of this Plato's utopia, you do not get to be a rich person, right? So Plato kind of adopted like an almost Diogenes-like hatred of corruption and rich people, because he knew that the corruption of the
figured out the
soul
way.
was like, yeah, he's trying to figure out how to deal with corruption, basically, right?
Yeah, power
And,
corrupts,
it's
money
interesting
corrupts. Like, he strips that away, but like what he's asking for, I also believe this too. If we're gonna live libertarian or even anarcho-capitalist, you have to have this. Anyone who's ruling or like calling the shots on anything, your elders who you consult for like information on like what you should do next, these people should be voluntarily standing. It's almost like military service, where you go out of your own volition and you sacrifice your life to live in a it's almost like monastic. He wants them to become monks essentially, and then they serve the people, right?
That's how it's supposed to be in the United States. It's kind of corrupt now. So
but they're provided for, like,
the
they should
reptilians
be
are never
living.
going to allow that.
Them live in a commune. There should be a commune for like the elected body of the government, and like we'll feed them with the tax dollars, but if you're not doing well, we're not going to feed you that much.
That's true.
I brought up earlier, remember the Olympic athletes in Athens had their food subsidized by the state because they believed that the athletes were valuable, right? So later on, because of this, and remember the joke that Socrates told about how he believed that the philosophers should also be given free food by the city because of their doing a great service or whatever. Okay, later on, after Ptolemy takes over Egypt, the Library of Alexandria starts doing what? Giving out free food to philosophers, because they're trying to recreate these circumstances, and they're treating philosophers exactly like Olympic athletes, exactly as Socrates was joking about. So until the Romans, I think it was Emperor Theodosius, forcefully closes and makes illegal being a philosopher and doing Greek studies and stuff, and only makes Christianity the only allowable, practicable religion or studies or whatever later on. And that's even after Constantine. So we're talking way after like this stuff happens. Like, Egypt becomes the center of knowledge after Athens again in the like proto-modern world, and all the philosophers start coming to the Ptolemaic Egypt. One of the reasons is because they're giving out free food specifically to the philosophers. So if you study there, you get free food. It's kind of like
if you gamble in a casino enough, they'll bring you free drinks because they want you to stay in the casino. So I love this inversion though that's happening, where, you know, you grow up in high school and all the jocks and cheerleaders, you know, they're the most popular and they get the most stuff and whatever. But like this inversion of it, where it's like the nerds and the bookworms are the people that are getting like, you know, awards. And then from that, you also see in our society, it actually kind of changes, because we have like mathematics competitions, even like debate teams are indicative of this shifting of, let's reward people who are not necessarily the most beautiful and strong warriors of our society.
It's the shift from the heroes of the body to the heroes of the mind, right?
Yeah.
All right, so this brings us back to where our conversation began when we first had you on the show, and it teases out what is the nature of thelema. And it's funny because you asked me, you're like, well, do you think that Crowley was more on the Nietzschean or more on the Platonic? And I answered pretty quickly that he was on the Nietzschean, and if you read his writings, it sounds like that. And frankly, I would probably need to read some more Nietzsche. I think perhaps we should pick one of his texts and do a whole episode just on that text and then talk about it. But what I'm getting at is something I bring up on the show quite a bit, and that's the third chapter of the Book of the Law, where when you read it with a direct literal translation, it reads a lot like might makes right. But when you do an analysis of it and look at it with the Twilight vision, you use Egyptian wisdom, you do the interpretation of it the way we've done on the show, it paints more the hero of the mind, the person who goes inward and finds the good.
Because it's rooted in agape.
Yeah, it's rooted in agape. It really is. And so I just found that interesting, that I think our conversation came full circle when I was reading the Symposium, that despite whatever reputation Crowley has, the proper interpretation of the Book of the Law is much closer to Egyptian wisdom and the hero of the mind and the Platonic search for the good that is shining behind everything. And in fact, that's what separates thelema from Buddhism, is that Buddhism assumes that, you know, the base level of reality is nothingness or emptiness. But in thelema, it's actually the goodness, is joy. So that would be like the good.
Yeah, you made a really good point. You actually, you know, this conversation did come full circle, because it now you guys made me think about is W.B. Yeats versus Aleister Crowley. Okay, so W.B. Yeats was an Irish poet.
Yeah.
He was the guy in the Hermetic Dawn who opposed Aleister Crowley, right? And don't forget that W.B. Yeats won a Nobel Prize for his poetry. So we're talking about poets versus mystics again.
I had to study Yeats in high school, not Crowley, right? So
yeah, he's an Irish poet who is part of the Irish Romantic poetry movement, and he is an amazing poet. If you ever get a chance, read W.B. Yeats. He is a mystic, he's a Hermetic thinker, and he's an amazing Nobel Prize winning poet. So if anyone has any chance, please do yourself a favor, read Homer, but also read W.B. Yeats. Do some justice to the Irish. However, I will say at the same time, Crowley is basically like Nietzsche in this position, and W.B. Yeats is Plato or Homer, depending on how you look at it. It's like the poet versus the philosopher. Plato said that the poets say things that are beautiful and true, but which they don't understand. So I think that to a degree, Aleister Crowley was like obviously like an amazing thinker, and he was a systems operator. And I already brought that up before. He was a very adept individual, right? And he was very smart, but he didn't have the poetry gene the same way that Homer was like a genius and had the W.B. Yeats poetry gene, but Plato didn't have the poetry gene. Although you could argue he is a poet, and you could actually say Nietzsche is a poet too. So there's kind of this weird overlap you start seeing with the mystic, poet, philosopher. There's the Hegelian dialectic here, the three that keeps appearing, right? So I think that you could argue that somehow Aleister Crowley hated W.B. Yeats because of his poetry, because he had access to this ethereal realm of poetry. And what is poetry? It's a way of saying things that are true and beautiful, and a couple of lines of poetry is enough to sustain a generation.
Okay, before we move on, I have to kind of say something about that. Let me just show you how Crowley was actually the best and greatest of all poets, okay? I'm going to read one of his little poems real quick. Just real quick.
He's going to read White Stains, isn't he?
Oh, no.
Straddle your beast, my masterful bitch, with the thighs you greased, with the sweat of your itch. Spit on me, scarlet, mouth of my harlot. Now from your wide raw cunt, the abyss. Spend spouting the tide of your sizzling piss in my mouth. Oh, my whore, let it pour, let it pour. Okay, we can move on. Oh, he talks about farts too. Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Damn, that's some pretty gritty like lines for sure. And see, that's why I think that you could say that what he's saying, what Aleister Crowley is saying, is definitely like poetry is so evocative, right? Like it almost like makes you feel like he's like saying it into your ear. It's almost like disturbing how like real he's being. And I think that part of it is like, part of it shows you that poetry is capable of saying things that philosophers can't, and that people who are just saying nonfiction things, they can't say it the way that they say it. There's something about poetry that, like I said, it like sets a fire inside the individual.
I have
He
so
also
much I
talks
want.
about how he uses as lube.
Okay, stop.
Please,
Can I want to
cut that? That's so gross.
Can I want to no, I want to talk about it.
It's in the poem. It's in the poem. I'm not kidding. Like everything I said is fucking real.
Okay, stop.
I'm reading it right now.
I can explain, all right? Tim, what do you tell me is the way all the time? Like, in order
It
to move
depends on what I feel
forward
like.
in life, right? If you have a friend in life, do you,
Obstacles. The obstacle is the way.
yeah, do you need everything to be honey, sweet sunshine, and rainbows to move forward in life?
Hell no, that's pussy shit.
What's the good part of life?
Struggle.
Okay, what's that poem about? You
It's
shouldn't
hella
just
gross.
you shouldn't just fall in love with worldly eros. You shouldn't fall in love with common eros or common Aphrodite. You should fall in love with heavenly Aphrodite. And you should be willing to drink fucking piss to get there, because the earthly experience is the sacrament of the holy experience, and that the struggle is the way. And like this also is represented in like the cult of Shiva in Hinduism, right? You know, they meditate upon dead bodies. You know, they eat the poo-poo. And the idea is that even what is rejected, even what is considered gross and bad, is an expression of God in some way, right? And that you shouldn't allow your cravings and your aversions to direct you towards the divine, because you're never going to find it.
I want to like do a palate cleanse intellectually. I want to either read the
Wait,
second
I didn't even get
coming
to the
from
part where he
W.B.
asks
Yeats
for
right
his
now.
lover to smear diarrhea in his eyes.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. What part of the game is this?
Dude, it goes on and on. This is like so long. Please link it
I
in the
tell
show
you,
notes.
I've never, I'll be honest with you, other than doing research for this kind of stuff and for the occult thing, I never ran into any Aleister Crowley poems. I've never heard it like talked about outside of like occult circles. I don't know if it's like, 'cause obviously there's like way worse poems than that, and like I've heard worse, you know, like some of the stuff, I mean, some of the stuff in Homer and the Odyssey and Iliad is equally as disgusting and bad. And I think that's, so basically Plato would have
this
said
is like you gotta
no
scroll
to
to read
this.
this.
He
It's
would have
so
said
long.
absolutely no, because it would make people immoral listening to it, basically.
Yeah.
He would have said that we should play with toys and do math or something like that and work out, because he was so afraid of like the immorality of the comedy and the tragedy of Greek plays. He probably would have seen Aleister Crowley as like Homer or something like that, you know, like in the same category, like skilled poets that are leading people to like the filth, basically. And like, I think it's interesting because you see this dichotomy even within the occultist thing, where you have like the right hand path and the left hand path. So even within the like system of a cult, you don't have people that are all taking the same road, right? So I always the road less traveled by.
Yeah, but dude, like I've only been reading like little clips of this whole poem. It's so long. Like it's literally like
I believe you.
Wow.
Can I read the W.B. Yeats one so that I don't feel like I've done something?
You're on a list
Something
now, buddy.
terrible. I
Do
can
like-
do something good, equally good.
Yeah, go for it. It's become poetry hour.
Which one do you feel more, the sailing to Byzantium or the Second Coming? The Second Coming is after World War I, and it's like his most famous one. Maybe I'll just do that one. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack of all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. Hardly are those words out when a vast image of the Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and with the head of a man, gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it real shadows of the indignant desert birds. Darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slows toward Bethlehem to be born. Now tell me that wasn't like, come on, that's poetry.
Yeah, it's pretty epic. It's
I
missing
mean-
a lot of the poop though that was in the Crowley stuff.
He is one of the greats.
It's definitely missing the expletives, that's for sure. But remember that both of these men were part of the same organization, and that you also have to be a Freemason to be in the Order of the Hermetic Golden Dawn. So even though, like, yeah, you could say these men had completely different perspectives, they were both trying to be participating in the same organization.
Exactly.
So the intersection and the crossover of poetry and philosophy is like so close. It's like you could basically just call them all poets or all philosophers, and it's almost interchangeable at this point.
Philosophy is in a lot of things, though. Like, I took some philosophy. I only learned, like, Sartre and Beauvoir mainly, and then some of like the English and like mostly the French and English. So I'm not very well versed in Greek stuff. But yeah, I mean,
Old stuff is the good stuff.
I was interested in the Byzantine poem as well, because in art history, surprisingly enough, I learned a lot more world history than in my world history class. And a lot of the art like flows through that area at the time, because it's like coming off the end of Egypt and whatever. And the Byzantine Empire is like the last stand of the Roman Empire. So that area is interesting to me. I didn't know like how it's perceived during Plato's time or whatever.
It was still there. It just wasn't developed until Constantine conquered it, right? It was still strategically important. The Theodosian walls were basically what made it like the powerhouse fortress that it was. And don't forget that they also had something really cool called Greek fire. Greek fire was basically this like magical substance that we don't even know what exactly it is, but it was basically like they would be able to like flamethrower other people's ships and stuff.
Napalm.
And the fire wouldn't go out.
All right.
They were literally flamethrowing other groups of people with magical fire.
So to bring this back to Thelema, it was actually Aleister Crowley's best student, Jack Whiteside Parsons, who was studying Greek fire when one day he was smoking a doobie outside and he saw a bunch of roofers and they were pouring tar on the roofs, and it all came together suddenly for him. He was like, what if I took what I learned with the Greek Greek fire and I put it with what the roofers were doing. And that's how he invented solid rocket fuel, because he got the idea to put the accelerant inside a cement-like substance. And then he perfected the way of pouring the solid rocket fuel into the boosters in like a spiral pattern, right? And, that way when it burns, like he'd actually have to bake this stuff in his oven, his home oven. And then when you'd light the fuse, it would go like, and that's how he invented solid rocket fuel.
So it's like a long strand of one charcoal piece that like combusts, and it just goes like a fuse.
He was trying to figure out Greek fire.
It kind of reminds me a bit of mosquito coils.
Exactly.
Can you explain that to me? I don't get it.
Just because Luke was talking about how it's in a spiral so that when it burns into a spiral, like in on itself, which is space efficient.
Eventually, to maximize the burn area, and I've seen this with my own eyes, the solid rocket fuel has a star in it, a perfect pentagram in it, because that has something to do with like surface area and all the rest of it. So like what you're talking about with the Greek fire, that is what inspired Jack Parsons to revolutionize our entire world. Like think about how rocketry has changed the world. It was because he was studying Greek fire and smoking a doobie while watching a bunch of roofers. Like, can I share some poetry from him? As long as we're sharing poetry.
Yeah.
Jack Parsons?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sure. Go for it.
We're kind of pooped out though, so hopefully he doesn't talk about that.
I hate Don Quixote. I live on peyote, marijuana, morphine, and cocaine. I never knew sadness, but only a madness that burns at the heart and the brain. I see each charwoman ecstatic, inhuman, angelic, demonic, divine. Each wagon a dragon, each beer mug a flagon that brims with ambrosial wine. I went to the city and found it a pity the devil was playing at hell, and 10 million mortals had entered hell's portals and thought they were all doing well. I said, see, dear people, on every church steeple, an imp of the devil at play. See ghouls cut their capers in daily newspapers, and fiends in police court hold sway. The mountains are palaces, women are chalices, meant to be supped and not sold. The desert a banquet hall set for a festival, right for the free and the bold. The wind and the sky are ours, heaven and all of its stars. Waken and do what you will. Break with this demon-spawned, hell-inspired nightmare. Bond, magic lies over the hill. They said I was crazy, ambiguous, lazy, disgusting, fantastic, obscene. So I hide for my sagebrush and cactus and corn mush to see if the air was still clean. Oh, I hiked Don Quixote. I live on peyote, marijuana, morphine, and cocaine. And may I be twice damned for a bank clerk or store hand if I visit the city again.
Claps.
Very interesting.
I've been thinking a lot about Jack Parsons since you brought him up because, I talk about the cyberpunk stuff and it's an obvious overlap because Aleister Crowley was a spy working for the British government and Jack Parsons was accused of being a spy by Joseph McCarthy.
Yeah, but he accused everybody of being
that-
a spy. Sorry, go on.
He did. Yes, you're right. But he was correct about all of them. And I think he was right about all of those people. And I think we told him he was wrong, but he was actually correct. And I think it's interesting. It says that Jack Parsons ultimately died at age 37 in 1952 in an unexplained home laboratory explosion.
You know what he said
it's
too?
Interesting.
But I'm not finished.
Yeah, he sounds like Archimedes then, if that was the case, right? Like my circles
his last
don't
words.
disrupt circles.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
His last words are, who's going to take care of me now?
Oh, really? I thought it was,
Yeah.
but I'm not finished. Okay. I could be
Well,
wrong.
he wasn't finished. So Jack Parsons was starting to work with Israel near the end, and there was some serious concern that he was going to take the secrets that he had developed in JPL and just give them to Israel. So, that's a possibility that had something to do with his demise, is that he was trading in secrets to foreign nations. And so it's possible he was assassinated for that reason. He also gave testimony against the LAPD in court because he basically proved that the LAPD was like car bombing people and he could prove it. And that happened when he was younger. So this would have had to have waited quite a few years for that to, if they
Yeah,
were
it probably
responsible.
wasn't that. I'm assuming it was the allegations of spying because you have to remember that all of these guys seem to be British people working for foreign governments and spies and stuff. And it seemed weird that Aleister Crowley is like this occult figure, but he's got this rocket scientist working for him basically. It's very much in
Dude,
the
Crowley
Cold
was a spy,
War,
bro.
cyberpunk spy genre. This is like some James James Bond shit, having Jack Parsons and Aleister Crowley together and operating together changes the whole dynamic, and it requires a second look, because these people are not just occult figures. These are spies. They are all spies. I'm telling
Julian,
you.
occultists have always made the best spies.
Yeah, we talked about that, how this is like a running thing.
Just to bring this back to Plato, I actually do think it has a lot to do with Plato, because both of these figures, Jack Parsons and Aleister Crowley, are related to the new Aeon, which you could tie into the destiny of America. And it seems very much to me that the founding of America and its constitutions is related to the idea or the concept of an ideal republic that's put forward in Plato's Republic.
For real.
Very much so.
It's just also, corruption makes it so that it's not going to happen. So I personally think that that's what's happened. But I think that was the general idea. I think that's the gist of the new Aeon, was to harken back to this ideal republic.
So the new Aeon, in terms of Nietzsche, his idea was that he didn't like, so Nietzsche had this idea that basically the appearance of Socrates and Plato was actually the end of Greece, because he said that the carrion vultures were already circling Athens, that people like philosophers, the appearance of the philosophers signaled the end of the society. So when people like us having this conversation right now are increasing the philosophical dialogue, that usually means that society is nearing its end. So what Nietzsche, his solution was essentially throw out the philosophers and throw out the Apollonians and bring back the Dionysians. So he believed in the Homeric heroes, and he threw the idea of the good being the justice and everything, and bad people being unjust. And he said the good is the strong and bad is the weak. So he basically tried to throw this morality on its head. And that's probably another reason Aleister Crowley liked him, because he threw out the idea of Christian morality and threw it out and said, no, this is making people weak, and it's making society weak, and it's making us worship weak people. It's the revenge of the weak and the ugly against the strong and the beautiful. And so Nietzsche takes the complete opposite perspective than Plato does. And he basically says that if anything, we need to go back to the Homeric hero, because we've lost something in demoting them. Because this is the important thing. In Plato's Republic, the philosophers are the kings, obviously, because he's a philosopher. And guess who the silver guardians are? Those are the Spartans. Those are the warriors. Those are the Homeric heroes. They've been demoted.
I'll tell you what, man, here's a real fucking fact for you. Nature does not punish evil. Nature punishes weakness.
Very much so. In evolution, right? Evolution is not necessarily just evolution of the strong. It's the evolution of the most adaptable.
Yeah.
I remember I brought up Darwin because Darwin was closely associated with Nietzsche as well, because Darwin, she said, was the one that killed God. God did not die because of biblical things. God died because humanity killed him. Because the line that Nietzsche said, which is actually Hegel said it first, but the God is dead, comma, and we have killed him. And
you're being a cultural heretic right now, right?
The death of God by science, because he wasn't talking about satanic biblical stuff. He was talking about that modern science destroyed religion. It was a metaphor.
Yeah, dude. But you can't say this kind of stuff. This is all heresy these days.
I was just talking about that exact thing with Luke on break.
Oh, about that quote?
Yeah, because Nietzsche himself didn't shun the divine. He expressed that the place where he wrote Thus Spake Zarathustra was sacred. And so he obviously doesn't himself not have a relationship with divinity, but he's making a commentary on modern ideologies and what it
Nietzsche
has
was
done,
not talking literally.
and what it has done to the divine and your perception of it.
For real.
And your connection to it.
I mentioned to my girlfriend on break that we're going to be talking about Nietzsche and, fuck that shit. Like, I'm not very I'm not a nihilist at all, right? But the quote, God is dead. And I mentioned that, and I've heard people recently talking about how, it's just, he's using language as a way to he's being ironic about it in a way. And I was like, oh yeah, that's bullshit. But she read me the full quote. And in a way, even if he doesn't mean to say it, I feel like the full quote of the God is dead thing, he's saying that science and progressivism and how we're learning about this and how things work, germ theory was a big thing. Germs cause sickness. We thought it was we've fallen out of favor with God, or there's a demon in the house, or at the same time that could be true, but really if you just wash your hands, you won't get sick as much. So he's saying that as we learn more things, then we are literally stabbing God and killing it. And as we progress, and like you see this now in modern times as like scientism, is people like follow the science. You don't know the science, or trust the experts, or all this other shit that people say. It's like you can't use your own logic and discernment to notice patterns, then you're not doing science. Science is an activity. It's not a god. It's not a religion. And I think that's what he was saying, is like people are mistaking these discoveries and this like pushing into the unknown that science does. Like, this is what we're built to do, though. We're built to like look into the unknown. There is no way to fathom the entire universe. Like, we're never going to get to the peak. We're never going to get to the top. We're like a fish in a pond. You can't pull a fish out of water and expect it to understand that you can go to the moon. Okay. Yep. That's not something that a fish can comprehend. But as humans, we still try to strive and understand that. I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, Nietzsche is saying that people are understanding it as, oh, well, the science discovered that. Everything's like a settled deal and you don't need to like look or explore anymore. And I think that is what that quote is warning against. You know, I've never really been a fan of Nietzsche per se, but like I could tell this could be taken out of context to basically say like there's no God and you'll just die and like rot on the ground and there's nothing else. Like there's nothing above our reality.
Well, Nietzsche's all about the will to power, which can be either like extremely good or extremely evil. Sadly, a lot of the stuff that he said was taken by his sister and like twisted, and the twisting that happened to his philosophy and his work, the Nazis of all people like grabbed onto. Yeah. But Nietzsche at his core has nothing to do with any of that bullshit.
I was going to say there's an important scene. There's an allegorical moment from Thus Spoke Zarathustra in which Prophet Zarathustra carries the body of a dead tightrope walker on his back to bury him. The scene unfolds in a marketplace where a tightrope walker has just fallen to his death after being taunted by a jester, interestingly enough. When Zarathustra finds the dying man on the ground, he tells him that there's no devil and no hell and offers to bury him. Carrying the dead man on his back, Zarathustra is basically hauling a corpse around, signifying how humanity carries outdated ideologies, traditions, and dead moralities such as Christian dogma into the future. The tightrope walker is an embodiment of mankind itself. It's a rope fastened between animal and the overman, a rope over an abyss. Essentially, Nietzsche was making a comparison that like humanity was dragging around like the body of the ancient world with them, and that it was weighing us down, and that we just needed to bury it and give it its last rites. And I think that basically one of the reasons why Nietzsche saw Plato as his direct competition, because he knew how important he was and wanted to displace him. And then he saw Jesus also as just his direct competition. So it's like he couldn't have just displaced Jesus. He would have had to also displace Plato. So that shows you how important both of these characters are to Western civilization. It's like Jesus is the agape because he is the sacrificial lamb, right? Jesus is the embodiment of sacrifice. He's the suffering God, right? And Plato is the logos. He's the mind. He's the one that dragged humanity kicking and screaming out of the cave of the allegory and into the sun, into the logos, out of the horrible world that the ancients existed in because they were being taught by Homer, unfortunately. So I think it's really interesting today that Homer has become such a big topic and all these people are defending him. All these classicists are defending him and saying, oh, all these Western people are like, Homer's great and he's amazing and we should all read him. And I agree, we should read him, but we should read him with a critical eye, and we should understand that these were the stories that were displaced in order to give us the ethical society that we live in today. These are not part of the society that we currently inhabit. And that's why Nietzsche wanted to bring back some of these ideas, because he wanted the strong to rule.
So I would say there's a balance, because what is strength? And in our world, physical strength isn't as important as like empathy, like, you know, emotional strength, intellectual strength. Like there's a lot of different versions of strength. So I don't want like people to misinterpret that and think that Nietzsche was just saying, oh, it's just how big are your muscles. That's not what he's talking about. It's just strength in general against like all categories of what makes a person a person.
I mean, there's no escaping morality according to the golden rule. Eventually, you're going to land yourself in a place where you start contemplating the same kind of ideas that Plato did.
Yeah.
There's so
like
much
some
overlap.
people are a lot more like intuitively like strong. You know what I mean? Like Hecka's very intuitively strong. Mari's very yummy, good at cooking strong.
I will eat my neighbors. I'm literally looking at my neighbors now and going, I will eat your ass. Eat your ass.
You know what's interesting about that you bring that up actually is that I was thinking about what that Jack Parson thing you were reading to me. I've never heard that poem before. It was interesting because you know what it made me think of? It made me think of all of the old philosophers like Marcus Aurelius and Plato and Socrates drinking kykeon.
Yeah.
And kykeon was that hallucinogenic drink that was basically a mold that was growing on a fungus or a mold or something that was growing on wheat. And then they would turn it into a drink like beer, but it would make people hallucinate like LSD. And that's what they would drink during the Eleusinian mysteries in the initiation that, remember, all of these people did. And it would make them feel like they were dying, and it would make them have a LSD kind of experience, right? And they wouldn't be the quote unquote, wouldn't be the same person after, right? So when the Jack Parson was talking about like, I am the drugs, all I could think of was like, he's drinking kykeon.
Yeah.
Dude,
That was my first thought. I was like, he's drinking from the cup so heavily that he's like living that world. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
what we're
he
all
is
doing.
absolutely a
That's what Tim's doing, too.
Dionysian. He believes in indulgence.
Tim's doing the same thing. Mm-hmm.
I mean, the modern computational models that track the orbit of the planets are based on math that this guy gave us. Like, he gave us solid rocket fuel. His ritual that he did with L. Ron Hubbard, laugh it up, it coincided with the finding of the Nag Hammadi library. Like, Jack Parsons is my favorite magician.
Yeah, I did.
For a reason. And this poem, as bad as it is,
It's good.
It's just because I think both Jack Parsons and Crowley are terrible poets. That's just my personal opinion.
I mean,
they're not good poets.
Bro, he
Not good
tried.
poets,
It rhymed.
But it's an important song. It's an important thing, though, because like I said, it talks about
rhymed.
ideas that are important.
This is where the conspiracy theorists are kind of correct. Like, he saw a rocket launch as like Pan's dick fucking the sky. Like, he
had creative imagination, dude. He was in tune with it.
His Dionysian indulgence and his just love of blowing shit up is what advanced the world. Not hard work, not, classical study, like doing drugs and reading about what you're actually interested in and focusing on
Doing drugs and blowing shit up.
And yeah, he probably didn't get assassinated. He probably did just drop a bunch of explosive chemicals because his hands are sweaty because he's probably doing meth. Like, he probably did blow himself up. But he's a good example of how a Dionysian or someone that's following their bliss, someone that follows their own excitement, can actually revolutionize the world. And
well, dude, even creepier than that, remember in his journal, he spoke that like his death, how it would happen, and that's like exactly how it happened.
Well, I mean, L. Ron Hubbard
years later
took everything that he learned from Jack Parsons and Aleister Crowley and just like swapped out some names and some thematic stuff and just turned it in
Dianetics.
Made a pyramid scheme.
I am Xenu.
If you go and you do any research about the secret black weapons programs, psi research, all that, it goes right back to the Church of Scientology. So you can't tell me that some of it doesn't work. And you can't...
why are so many of those people Scientologists?
My point, so this is what I want to get across to Julian, and I'm sure the listeners of the show heard a million times. Like, Jack Parsons was a really good representation of what Thelema was capable of. He actually was derailed.
Blowing yourself up?
Dermer was he was possibly also an ex-Nazi or Nazi spy that contributed to like derailing Jack Parsons from leadership. And then you had L. Ron Hubbard, who also derailed him. And so I've always made the claim that like Jack Parsons is much closer to what Thelema should have been and could have been. It should have been a religion that embraced science, that embraced the equality of men and women, that saw humanity as a family, and that our destiny was to rise into the stars and explore both space inner and outer for eternity. That's what Thelema was meant to be, not all this other fucking shit.
Now it's fucking weird.
Well, that's the thing is, Julian's right. You could consider Thelema and a lot of lodges as a decentralized group of spies. And maybe that's properly what it is now. Maybe that's how it manifests in the world today, is a decentralized spy network.
We should do an episode on why occultists are like mostly spies, like the best spies.
That is a great idea, but I think if we want to continue this conversation with Julian, we should ask him for his recommendation on what we should read in terms of Nietzsche and come back and discuss Nietzsche.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because we got to gradually move up, right?
What do you recommend that we read or review to come back and discuss later, Julian? Because I'd like to continue.
I'd say Beyond Good and Evil, The Gay Science, and the will to power is his last one. So in that order, I guess.
Did you say the gay
yeah.
science?
Yeah, did you say that?
yeah.
Yeah, that's literally what it's called.
The gay
Oh my god,
science.
I want to read this. There is a thing.
Yep, it talks about the sacred band and how badass they were, all their tactics.
I'm gonna have to start
Gay-
with
I'm lying.
the gay
Oh.
science. I'm gonna have to start there.
Yes.
Talk about buttered sausage, where it comes from, what it does. Why is it doing what it's doing? Get it out of my face.
Okay, but I was gonna say, so there's one tie-in actually that I was gonna say that actually makes all of this stuff that you said accurate, which is, I brought this up before, but you're aware of the Sophia robot, right?
Oh yeah, I am. I know. Yeah, dude. Yeah.
Yeah, the Sophia robot created by Hanson Robotics. And it's interesting that it's named Sophia, which is a very Gnostic name. Listen to this. The robot was modeled after ancient Egyptian queen Nefertiti.
Ugh.
And the robot was created by a guy called David Hanson. And David Hanson, active OTO member.
No.
Figures.
So
Yeah,
We
and
talked about that.
and he's also
actually.
connected to Ben Gortzel, who's like all up in Epstein's emails so deep it's disgusting. So like, yeah.
Bro, that's so fucking
yeah,
gross.
so basically I have the emails right here basically, and what David Hansen is doing is he's offering Epstein the opportunity to spend millions of dollars to get a brain download lab put into his house, and Epstein has a brain download lab put into his house with a machine that looks like Cerebro from fucking X-Men, and
We
it basically
actually did-
brain scans people.
We actually did bring this up when we were doing Epstein. This
Yeah, I
specific
believe
thing,
it.
yeah.
People and putting it into the robots. So those robots actually have brain scanned human brains operating inside them.
I would like to say
So-
that y'all should all watch Interface. Like, it directly relates to this and like cyberpunk stuff.
Do you really need to download your consciousness into a robot when all you have to do is just change your name to Palm Beach Pete and then
But
you
what
just
if
go
the
right
robot-
back to doing what you were doing, but this time in public? Oh my god.
Oh, you're missing the point of the
What
robots.
if the
You're missing
what if the
point of
robot is
robots.
God?
No,
if
what
the
is
robot
no, Julian,
God?
what's the point of the robots?
No. Oh, it's so much worse than you think. Why do they want robots with real human minds?
I don't like that.
You know, if I know their
So you
style,
can fuck 'em.
it's so you could replace humans. You can replace the humans because you can't make them do what you want, but you can make a robot do what you want.
Well, think about it like this. So you're telling me that Epstein's dead, but he had a brain scan lab where he could scan his brain and put it into a robot, right?
Bro, Mecha Epstein.
So you're saying
Yeah.
ChatGPT is Epstein?
So what I'm saying is Jeffrey Epstein's not dead. They shared his consciousness into many different robots and machines so that like they have scans of his brain and also other people that came to his house as well. Like it was like he basically had David Hansen like set up all this shit for him so that basically they were brain scanning people. So like version of him is still alive basically in one of these machines. That's my theory anyways, and I'm sticking to it. I don't care what anyone else says. If I end up gone next week, it's probably because Epstein bot showed up.
I fucking love it. I
Bro.
love it.
Way back in the day, I had heard the prototype of this technology was Mao Zedong, and that Mao Zedong has like living in some sort of mummy computer, and he's like secretly running China. But like that one's really far away in my distant memory, and I frankly would have to do more research.
Dude,
but
the future is Metal Gear Solid across the board.
it
Like,
actually
They're
is.
gonna have like nano machine bodies and shit.
Why does Kojima keep being not wrong? That bothers
I
me.
know.
You know, and in fact,
Yeah.
it was fun listening to the Symposium because it's about Eros, and you know, one of the sub themes of Death Stranding 2 is that his child is like Cupid or Cupid themed, and like, what is it that connects everybody? Why do we do the
Love.
things that we do? Yeah. So anyway, let's go read some Nietzsche. I want to learn the gay science.
Yeah, I
And-
love gay shit. Let's do this.
No, right?
So thank you for coming, Julian. I hope we can finagle you. What's the word? Shanghai you into another episode where we talk about Nietzsche.
Well, I'm up for any shenanigans in the future. whenever
Well, we gotta do
possible.
like everything gradually up to modernism. So you're
Yeah.
probably gonna have to be on for many episodes.
I know.
And,
I didn't even get to do
unfortunately,
the
you don't have a
music.
choice
I
in that
didn't even
matter.
get to do the secret music.
Aw, you should make
Yeah.
it.
All right, guys. I want you guys to
Like,
get well
sadly, it's
versed.
just not up to you.
The will to power, and the gay science. Until then, everybody. Thank you for joining us, Julian. We'll
I've already
catch you
read
next time. Thank you, everybody. Eat carrots and shoot lasers.
Woo.
Pew, pew, pew.